What if I told you that the United States of America once fought a war so secretive, so deliberately hidden from its own citizens, that even decades later, most Americans have never heard a single word about it? Not a skirmish, not a covert operation, a full-scale war, with soldiers on the ground, with casualties, with a clear enemy, and with a government that looked its own people in the eye and said absolutely nothing. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is documented history. This is real. And today, for the first time, you are going to hear the full story. Stay with me, because what you are about to learn will change the way you see America forever. To understand this hidden war, we need to go back to the early 1960s. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was at its peak. The world was divided between two superpowers, each desperate to spread their influence across the globe. In Southeast Asia, a small landlocked country nestled between Vietnam and Thailand sat quietly on the map. Most Americans could not find it. Most Americans could not even pronounce its name. That country was Laos. Laos had officially declared itself neutral. It was not America's ally. It was not America's enemy. According to the 1962 Geneva Accords, a formal international agreement, no foreign military power was allowed to operate inside Laos. The United States signed that agreement, and then the United States violated it completely, secretly, for over a decade. What happened inside Laos between 1961 and 1975 is one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in American history. And for years, the United States government classified every single detail of it. They called it the Secret War, and it was the largest covert military operation the CIA had ever run. So what was America doing in Laos? To understand that, you need to understand something called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was a massive network of jungle roads, paths, and supply routes that ran through Laos and Cambodia. North Vietnam was using it to funnel weapons, ammunition, food, and soldiers down into South Vietnam to fight American forces. America could not allow that supply line to survive. If it did, the war in Vietnam would be lost. But here was the problem. America had signed a treaty promising not to operate inside Laos. If the United States sent in conventional troops and jets openly, it would be an international scandal. It would expose America as a treaty breaker in front of the entire world. So the CIA came up with another plan, a secret plan. They would not use American soldiers in uniform. They would recruit, train, arm, and command a secret army made up of a local Laotian ethnic group called the Hmong people. The Hmong were fierce mountain warriors. They knew the terrain. They had their own reasons to fight the communist Pathet Lao forces that were threatening their villages and their way of life. The CIA found their general. His name was Vang Pao, and what Vang Pao and his Hmong army accomplished over the next decade is almost beyond belief. At its peak, the secret Hmong army numbered over 40,000 fighters, 40,000 soldiers fighting a war that officially did not exist. The CIA supplied them with everything: weapons, food, uniforms, air support. American military advisors operated alongside Hmong units, but they wore civilian clothes. They carried no military identification. Officially, they were not there. And above the jungle, something remarkable was happening. The CIA had created its own secret airline, It was called Air America. On the surface, it looked like a regular cargo company. Behind the scenes, it flew combat missions, dropped supplies to Hmong troops in remote mountain valleys, and airlifted wounded fighters out of battle zones. American pilots, real American military pilots and CIA contract flyers, were flying combat sorties over Laos every single day, and none of it was being reported. None of it was being acknowledged. When reporters asked questions, the government denied everything. Meanwhile, the bombing campaign that America launched over Laos was staggering in its scale. Between 1964 and 1973, the United States dropped more than 2 million tons of bombs on Laos. That is more than all the bombs dropped by all sides during the entire Second World War combined. Laos, a country roughly the size of Utah, became the most heavily bombed nation per capita in the history of human warfare. And the American public knew almost nothing about it. Senators who tried to investigate were stonewalled. Journalists who got close to the truth were cut off. The entire operation was buried under layers of classification, denial, and deception. Now I want you to stop for a moment. Because behind all of this history, behind all of these statistics and code names and secret operations, there are human beings. The Hmong people paid an almost unimaginable price for their loyalty to the United States. An estimated 30,000 Hmong soldiers were killed during the secret war. But it did not stop there. Because when the war ended badly, when the communist Pathet Lao took control of Laos in 1975, the Hmong were left behind. The United States government, the same government that had recruited them, armed them, trained them, and relied on them for over a decade, made no plan to protect them, no plan to evacuate them. No public acknowledgement that they had ever fought alongside American forces. The Pathet Lao labeled every Hmong who had fought with the CIA as a traitor and an enemy of the state. The persecution that followed was brutal. Villages were destroyed. Families were hunted. Tens of thousands of Hmong fled into the jungle, living in hiding for years. Many crossed the Mekong River into Thailand as refugees. Even in the years that followed, as Hmong refugees began arriving in the United States, there was no official welcome, no ceremony, no acknowledgement from the government of what they had done, what they had sacrificed, and what they had lost. For decades, their story was invisible, and they carried their silence with quiet dignity, even as they rebuilt their lives in places like Minnesota, California, and Wisconsin. The debt that America owes the Hmong people is one that has never been fully paid, and it is one that far too few Americans even know exists. So how did this stay secret for so long? And when did the truth finally start to come out? The secrecy was maintained through a combination of aggressive classification, institutional intimidation, and the simple fact that most Americans were already overwhelmed by what they were being told about Vietnam. Laos was a war within a war, hidden behind the curtain of an already controversial conflict. The few Americans who knew the truth, the CIA officers, the Air America pilots, the military advisors, were bound by strict secrecy oaths. Many of them kept those oaths for decades. Some have gone to their graves never having spoken publicly about what they witnessed. The first real cracks in the wall of secrecy came in 1971, when a Senate subcommittee, led by Senator Stuart Symington, managed to hold hearings on the secret war in Laos. The hearings were held in closed session, away from the public and the press. But some of the testimony leaked out, and for the first time, Americans began to get a glimpse of what their government had been doing. The full story began to emerge slowly over the following decades. Investigative journalists, declassified documents, former CIA officers who decided that history deserved the truth, and the Hmong veterans themselves who began to speak. Books were written, documentaries were made, memorials were built. But even today, in 2024, the secret war remains one of the least known chapters in American military history. Ask 100 Americans about the war in Laos. Fewer than 10 will know what you are talking about. And that gap in our collective memory is not an accident. It is the direct result of a deliberate campaign of silence that went on for years. So why does any of this matter today? Why should you care about a secret war that ended half a century ago in a country most Americans cannot find on a map? It matters because of what it tells us about power, about truth, and about the obligations that come with both. It matters because the men and women who fought in that war, both American and Hmong, deserve to be remembered. They deserve to have their sacrifices acknowledged, not buried under government classification stamps. It matters because the Hmong families who lost everything, their homes, their villages, their loved ones, deserve to have their story told. Not as a footnote in a history book, but as a full and honest chapter in the story of America's engagement with the world. And it matters because the secret war is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern. Throughout the 20th century, the United States government conducted covert operations in countries around the world. In Iran, in Guatemala, in Chile, in Angola. Operations that were hidden from the American public, that often had devastating consequences for the people involved, and that were only acknowledged years or decades later. Each time, the justification was national security. Each time, the cost was borne by someone else. And each time, the American public was left in the dark. The lesson of the secret war in Laos is not that America is purely evil or purely good. The lesson is more complicated than that. It is that power exercised without accountability tends to produce consequences that outlast the original intention. It is that the people who are used as instruments of foreign
policy are real human beings with real lives and real futures that are shaped by decisions made in offices they never enter and by leaders whose names they barely know. It is that silence, even when it is strategic, has a human cost. In recent years, there has been some movement toward acknowledgment and reconciliation. In 1997, the United States erected a memorial at Arlington National Cemetery to honor the Hmong and Laotian veterans who fought alongside American forces. It was a quiet ceremony. It did not make front-page news, but for the Hmong veterans and their families who attended, it was deeply meaningful.
Laos itself continues to deal with the physical legacy of the bombing campaign. An estimated 30% of the bombs dropped on Laos during the secret war never exploded. They remain buried in the soil, in rice paddies, in schoolyards and forests. They are called unexploded ordnance, and they continue to kill and maim Laotian civilians to this day, decades after the last American plane flew its last mission. The United States has provided funding for bomb clearance operations in Laos, but advocates say the contribution remains far below what the scale of the problem demands. The Hmong diaspora in America has grown into a vibrant and resilient community. There are now over 300,000 Hmong Americans living in the United States. They are teachers, doctors, engineers, business owners, elected officials, and artists. They are building lives and futures while carrying the weight of a history that most of their fellow Americans do not know. And in recent years, a new generation of Hmong Americans has begun reclaiming that history, writing books, making films, telling their grandparents' stories, so that the secret war does not disappear into the silence that created it. The war America fought that nobody was ever told about was real. The people who fought it were real. The sacrifices were real. And the silence that surrounded it was real too. History is not just a collection of facts and dates. It is a living thing. And when we refuse to look at the parts of it that are uncomfortable, when we allow whole chapters to be buried because they are politically inconvenient, we do a disservice to the people who lived those chapters and to ourselves. You now know something that millions of Americans do not. You know about the secret war. You know about the Hmong people. You know about the bombers and the jungle and the secret army and the silence that followed. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. But at the very least, the next time someone tells you that governments never lie, that history is always told truthfully, that what is officially acknowledged is the same as what actually happened, you will know better. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that were never supposed to be told. If this video opened your eyes, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The story of the secret war in Laos deserves to be known, and now you are the one who knows it.